All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my last episode about culture in the early Americas. This is going to be about the end of the Aztec and Inca empires. Let's go ahead and learn about it. All right. Gonna click this button here. Okay, now it works. So, Europe knew from Columbus that this was a brand new world. It was not China, it was not India, it was something totally unknown to them. So they decided to send this guy, Hernan Cortez, to hunt down this supposed amazing civilization in the middle of Mexico that was supposedly full of gold and wealth and all this. And it's important for me to actually explain to you Hernan Cortez as a man. He was the son of a Reconquista general. He trained his whole life to be a knight to fight the Muslims. And by the time he grew up to be an adult, the Muslims had already been kicked out of Spain. So he's then put on this quest to go and uh, explore the New World and find this fabled city in the center of Mexico. He is really going to be hardcore about Christianity. He's going to follow in Spain's footsteps and really try to push their agenda on the peoples of the New World as well. Okay, so yeah, there's Hernan Cortez. There he is, and there. This is the path he's going to take. He sort of stops at the Yucatan first and bounces around closer and closer, and he will eventually get to Tenochtitlan. Okay, so yes, he was definitely one of the most religious people I have ever read about in world history. I mean, maybe like, Jesus and some other people are above him, but this guy was a real believer. And he drilled his soldiers really well. His guys were experienced in war and combat, and they had already known from their experience with the Reconquista in Spain that spreading their religion through violence was something they were kind of accustomed to do. And I mentioned this in my first video, but when these guys come to the New World, they come in full armor, they come with guns, they come with horses, and all of this stuff is going to be so foreign and abnormal to the Aztec and the Incan people that they're going to be outmatched by these Spanish invaders. So here's Cortez coming through Mexico, and there they are talking to some Inca people. Um, and when Cortez and his small army, I think he only had like 200 guys, but when they came to Mexico, they were shocked to find that so many people were already dying. The smallpox disease that Columbus and his men introduced to the islands of the Caribbean had already got to Mexico even before Europeans did. And it's just because the way pandemic diseases spread, they just bounce from people to people to people. And smallpox and measles, they spread quick. And everywhere Cortez and his men went, they would just find bunches and bunches of dead people. Almost every society they encountered, 50% of more of people were dead. And Cortez and his men, they interpret this as God is punishing these people for not following Christianity. They didn't really have an understanding of microscopic diseases and bacteria. And I want to mention this again. This truly was an alien invasion. The people of the Aztec lands had never considered someone like this would show up carrying all these foreign weapons and bringing foreign disease. There actually was this connection, though, that Cortez sort of appeared similar in his characteristics to one of the Aztec gods. So a lot of the Aztecs were like, maybe he really is a god, and that was another confusing element to this whole interaction. All right, so there's Cortez and his guys walking along, a whole bunch of dead people everywhere they go, and people dying from smallpox and measles. And a really lucky thing happened to Cortez. As he was bouncing along trying to find this city, he encountered this young girl. History knows her as La Malinche, and she knew 5 languages, including Spanish. One of Columbus's advanced scouts had met her years before, taught her the language, and she hooked it up with Cortez pretty quick. They had some children together, and later on, Cortez actually got tired of her, and some of Cortez's lieutenants continued relationships with her. But she's kind of a controversial figure in Mexican history because she she was probably one of the first women in Mexico to, kind of be this, or her children were especially a blend of traditional culture and Spanish culture. But then again, she did kind of sell out to the Spanish, and she aided Cortez being his translator and teaching him about the culture and teaching him some ways to sort of interact with their society. She taught him ways how to kind of uh, teach people more about Christianity and spread the religion better. Um, but yeah, she's controversial. I will say that much, no doubt. But yeah, she was invaluable to Cortez. Without her, he could not have taken over the Aztecs and taken Mexico over for Spain, no doubt. All right, so everybody cool with La Malinche? Moving on. So, yep, that's what she looked like. And oh, I'll add this in. So, La Malinche, she was not from the Aztec tribe. Her tribe was one of those ones that was kept getting kind of picked on by the Aztecs, and their people kept getting taken and sacrificed every time they had a war. So, Malinche, she had the motivation to really stick it to the Aztecs, and so she was happy to help the Spanish get sort of revenge for her people. So, okay, moving on. There's Cortez and Malinche. There's Malinche right there being the translator. And then there's Malinche in the middle as Cortez talks to the king of the Aztecs. Okay, so, and as Cortez was exploring Mexico, he and Malinche would meet these tribes of people, and they would, Cortez would be like, hey, where's the great city of the Aztecs? Where's this, amazing city that's floating on water that has all this gold? And the people kept giving Cortez directions, and they were really, impressed with these foreign people riding their horses, these new metals. They had guns, they had all this cool stuff. And a lot of people actually started to ally with Cortez. So Cortez started to have this sort of a group of native allies on his quest closer and closer to the Aztecs. But every once in a while, though, the people would meet Cortez and say, oh, you're a god? We're going to sacrifice some people for you. Would you like that? And Cortez is like, absolutely not. Human sacrifice is against the Bible. In fact, your whole religion is against the Bible. You got to destroy all of your statues of your old gods. You got to stop human sacrifice. And you got to learn all about Jesus, or I'm going to kill you. And some of these people were not about that. So even before Cortez got to the Aztecs, he had a couple little battles and skirmishes with these smaller cities and villages that didn't want him to destroy their religion. And what would happen is these tribal warriors would go up to Cortez and give him like the battle stance and challenge him to one-on-one combat. But then Cortez would just take out his gun and shoot him, or Cortez would get on his horse and just plow him through with a sword. And the amount of violence that the Spanish brought to the New World was just almost overwhelming for the native Mexicans, who had this very clear way of fighting and a clear way of doing violence. He didn't play by the rules of combat. All these guys would be challenging Cortez to a duel, and then Cortez would just slice them before responding to the challenge. So it was a total mess, because they didn't know how to interact with this way different culture that was so more comfortable with killing and violence. So there's Cortez plowing through people, slicing dudes, and then fighting and destroying the idols and the statues at the top of these Aztec temples, saying there can only be one God, the Christian God. Yeah, and there's something else I added this later because I think this is just cool. I read this book about Cortez in 2018, and I was really surprised when this historian argued that the big advantage that the Spanish brought with them to the New World, it was not the guns, it was not the armor, it was not the steel weapons. Rather, this historian found out that the natives of Mexico were super freaked out about horses and war dogs. And yeah, there's a picture right there for you. The Spanish trained these big giant dogs, and they put like steel armor on the dogs, and they had the dogs like chase after people and bite them in their legs and stuff. There's another picture there. And by all accounts, the Aztecs, they could handle the steel weapons, the armor, and the guns, but the horses and the dogs freaked them out so much. And it just made me think, like, in all these video games and movies that I watch where, like, evil aliens invade modern day America, it's usually the aliens have like laser guns and are flying around in flying saucers, But in our historical comparison here, what if these aliens that come from outer space bring some sort of crazy trained animal creature that attacks us, And that's what our bigger concern ends up being. So cool. Anyway, trained war dogs. Yeah, look, they got like a little spike on the end of the dog, so when he jumps on people, it just whacks them. And they're chasing people down, and the Spanish are just almost invincible whenever they fight the Aztecs. Super, super crazy. All right, well, eventually, Cortez and his growing army in La Malinche reach the great city of Tenochtitlan, and then they're introduced to the king of the Aztecs, the last king. His name was Montezuma, sometimes called Montezuma. But by all accounts, Montezuma made a lot of really bad choices. The first one was he allowed Cortez and his group to come into the city, and he treated them as honored guests. And historians have sort of analyzed this, and they're like, well, maybe Montezuma wanted to learn more about the Spanish. Maybe he wanted to kind of understand their technology, understand their animals, understand where they came from. But also, when he let in Cortez and his men very quickly started to like plan out the city, find out where the gold was, find out where the leaders were. So it was sort of a two-way spying mission that I don't think was in Montezuma's interest. So, but Montezuma also said, look, my city has 1 million people. You've got 600 guys. We outnumber you 1,000 times over. We'll be fine. As we'll see, they won't be fine. So here's the Spanish riding their horses into the great city of Tenochtitlan. There are those champas fields where they're growing stuff on those little islands. And then there's the great temple in the middle of the city where human sacrifices happened every day. All right, there's Cortez, La Malinche, and Montezuma meeting each other. And then there's Montezuma there, and here they are being like, what's up? How's it going? Talk to you about stuff. Okay, so for a month, Cortez and his men were hanging out in Tenochtitlan. Everything was going fine. And then one day, Cortez did not order this. One day, some of his Spanish soldiers witnessed a human sacrifice being made. And his soldiers were like, no, no, no. There is zero human sacrifice. Don't kill people. That's wrong. So what did his men proceed to do? They killed a bunch of people. That's kind of a weird way of thinking, Mr. Brown. I see, I totally agree. So these guys attempted to stop a human sacrifice ritual. It caused a fight, and then things just totally fell apart. And these Spanish guys just started shooting Aztec people. The Aztec people started fighting back with their clubs, started throwing rocks and stuff. For the most part, the Aztecs weren't, doing all that much damage. But Cortez realized the precariousness of his situation, so he and his top general guys ran into Montezuma's house, and they put a gun to Montezuma's head and held him hostage. And during that night, a huge crowd of people started swarming around where the Spanish were, and they were like, demanding justice for the Spanish, saying, how dare they stop a riot? How dare they kill people in the streets? And so Cortez still puts a gun to Montezuma's head and says, Montezuma, go outside of this house temporarily and calm the people down and tell them to go home. So Montezuma then walks out of the house, maybe walks onto this balcony, and then he's trying to talk down the crowd. And what happens next is kind of up for debate. But Montezuma dies. The Aztec people say that Cortez wasn't happy with what he was saying, so Cortez shot him. The Spanish say that the crowd got so antsy and angry, people started throwing rocks at the Spanish, and one of those stray rocks hit Montezuma in the head, killing Montezuma. Without a hostage, the crowd just kind of burst through the doors of their house, and the Spanish then fought their way out of the city. As they were fighting their way out of the city, they also like stole a bunch of stuff. A bunch of Spanish people died. Some of them drowned in the shallow waters because they're heavy armor. They can't really go through super shallow water. Can't really swim. Um, but anyway, the Spanish were kicked out of the city, and it was just a terrible, terrible diplomatic mess. So yeah, that's how that interaction ended. So there's Cortez and his men running out of the city, killing people as they go, and then they are shooting Aztec people doing human sacrifices. So a few months later, Cortez assembles an even bigger army. He calls the Spanish for reinforcements. This time they send him cannons. They send him like 3,000 guys. They cut off the bridges to the city. They start bombarding the city. They starve the people out, and eventually the Aztecs surrender. As soon as they surrendered, they got back into the city and they completely destroyed the Great Pyramid. And on top of the Great Pyramid, they had, or on the ruins of the Great Pyramid, they had the Aztecs create the first big church in Mexico. And it's still a big church in Mexico to this day. They also renamed Tenochtitlan Mexico City, which is, as we know, the biggest city in Mexico. So, yep, here it is. There they are. They go back in the city, destroy all those statues of gods and idols. They rip them all down. And all these, this is a city close to Tenochtitlan, but Tenochtitlan probably originally looked something like this, with a bunch of big stone pyramids, and I'm sure like human sacrifice used to occur at the top of that thing. And it's interesting that today Mexico City is literally built on top of the ruins of Tenochtitlan. So if you ever do end up in Mexico City and you just dig deep enough, it's very possible you will find Aztec materials and Aztec ruins. So that is super cool to me. Okay, I've got another topic still with this video. So for years after Cortez, I think for like 40 or 50 years, it was a long time, people continually explored the New World, and they heard all these rumors of like a fountain of youth and another great civilization full of gold, but almost all of those rumors were untrue, and a lot of people explored the New World and got nothing out of it. But there was one guy who also found another amazing civilization. This guy's name was Francisco Pizarro. And Pizarro, he was all about Jesus too, but he was more about the money than anything else. This guy wanted to get rich quick. And he heard about how rich Cortez got for finding the Aztecs, so he was going to really stake his claim on finding another civilization in South America, and he would find one. So let's check it out. There's Pizarro right there exploring South America, and he's going to find the Inca civilization. Okay, so yeah, as he was exploring South America, he discovered the Incas. He also had a small army just like Cortez did, and this civilization was high up in the Andes Mountains. A lot of people said there's no way any serious human populations could live up there. It's just too high. There's not enough air. But if people sort of what's it called? Acclimate to the climate as they go up and up and up a mountain. They like take multiple day-long breaks. Their lungs will adjust. And Pizarro and his men did that, and then they started exploring around. And sure enough, there's a big old civilization up there full of people. All right, so once again, these people are freaking out. They've never seen horses before. And also, once again, the Spanish are going to do some terrible, terrible things to these people. Okay, so Pizarro and his men walking around South America, and eventually they do encounter some cities and villages. They find out they're a part of this bigger country, and Pizarro and his men say, "We would like to meet your king." And so, sure enough, the king accepts this invitation to meet these foreign invader alien people. And the king Atahualpa hears that, it's probably about 200 guys. So Atahualpa, he gets 5,000 of his best warriors together, and they march all the way to the edge of their borderlands. And Atahualpa, he's riding on this giant golden throne. All these people are carrying him. And, it was probably an impressive sight to see. But Pizarro ordered his men to set up an ambush. Okay, these guys had guns. They were hiding behind walls and stuff. And Pizarro and his head priest, they have this interaction with the king that's kind of famous for historical purposes. So I'll try to talk it out right now. So Pizarro, they have an interpreter. So Pizarro's talking to the king of the Inca, and he says, like, we've come from the land across the sea. We represent the Spanish king. We're here to spread ideas of Christianity. We also want you to submit to the Spanish king. We want you to give us so much of your gold every year. And Atahualpa, he replies with, I'm the king of the Inca. We're the big power around here. Y'all can leave and don't come back. And so, like, really, they had a really negative exchange at first. But then Pizarro's bishop comes over, or his priest comes over, and Pizarro's priest presents Atahualpa with a Bible. And through the interpreter, he's telling Atahualpa, you should understand the knowledge in this book. This is the knowledge of the one true God. This is the right way to do religion. Don't do human sacrifice. And Atahualpa, he had never seen a book before, because if you remember, the Inca people are all about quipu, and they've never seen written letters or paper or any of that. So Atahualpa, he kind of like flips through the book. He doesn't really get anything out of it, and so he just kind of throws the book on the ground. And this was a Bible, okay? And these guys are super into Christianity. So Pizarro and his men are just appalled that Atahualpa would throw a Bible on the ground. So Pizarro gives a signal. His dudes jump out from the corners of where they're hiding, and they just start unloading their guns on Atahualpa and his bodyguards. Atahualpa is actually never hit by any bullets, and Pizarro actually, he even sort of like protects Atahualpa, weirdly enough, well, because he knows he wants to hold him as a hostage. But all of Pizarro's 5,000 bodyguards, they've never seen horses before, they've never seen guns before, they've never seen war dogs before, so they just freak out and run away. And in the end, 0 Spanish guys died, about 1,000 of these Inca guys died, and Pizarro held Atahualpa captive. So once Atahualpa is now a captive of Pizarro, Atahualpa says, what do you want to let me go? And Pizarro says, I want enough gold and silver to fill up this big giant room that we're in right now. And Atahualpa says, okay. So Atahualpa sends out some messengers, and for the next 3 months, people are going all over the Inca Empire, finding gold, finding silver, and they give this man a fortune. 20 tons of gold and silver. That's amazing. In modern day terms, that must be like $1 billion or something. So it's huge money. This is probably the biggest ransom in the history of the world. So, all right, there's Atahualpa riding in there. Pizarro and his men kidnap him, and then they're asking for gold to release him. But here's where things just get sad. So, sure enough, Atahualpa gets all the gold Pizarro could ever ask for. Pizarro starts figuring out a way to get this stuff back to Spain. And then Pizarro recognizes that all surrounding him, like in the nearby fields, are just thousands and thousands more of these Inca soldiers. And that as soon as he releases Atahualpa, these Inca soldiers will descend on him and, overwhelm him and his men. I mean, look, guns and horses and dogs are good when you're fighting 10 times your number, but 100 times your number, you're just going to get overwhelmed. So he then says, Atahualpa, I can't let you go. If you become Christian, we will let you live. But if you keep up your old religion of human sacrifice and throwing girls in volcanoes to freeze to death, we will have to kill you. So Atahualpa, he then, through a translator, figures out Christianity and says, okay, I'll do it. I become Christian. And Pizarro and his men didn't expect that would happen. So Pizarro and his men burned him alive anyway. Super rude, Pizarro, super rude. And by that time, they had set up good defenses. Pizarro had called in some more reinforcements. Pizarro also had talked out with some other Inca people to sort of create this civil war. And he destabilized the country so greatly that soon he put himself in charge of the Inca lands, and all of South America submitted to Spanish rule. So really bad dude, I'm going to say. Not a man I respect. Pizarro broke a lot of people's trust. He kidnapped people and then burned them alive anyway. So, yeah, there's all that gold that he got, and all that gold was, of course, fancy Incan art, but the Spanish melted it down into gold bricks so they could easily transport it back to Europe. And there they are, kidnapping Atahualpa, and they burn him at the stake. Super rude. Okay, so Spaniards intermarried with natives, and they had this kind of mixed culture called mestizos. And 93% of Mexicans, and probably that same number throughout all of Latin America actually, are mestizos today. So Mexico also created this society based on racism called the castas. I'm going to deep dive into this more later. But the overall concept of Mexican society during its early history was the more white skin you had, the better you were treated in society. And a question I would pose to the class is that's still true in Mexican culture today. Is racism a big part of Mexican culture? And I've heard students argue both sides. So it's sort of like when there's a dad from Europe and a mom from Mexico, and the baby's kind of half and half both cultures. You'd call them a mestizo. And yeah, but here's kind of the same vibe. And then, yep, there's mestizo families. Okay, so Spain became so wealthy from all this money in this new world. They had laid claim to basically, well, not really all of South America. I mean, Portugal had a lot of it too, but so much of South America and so much of North America. These whole two continents were just totally in Spain's influence. They were the superpower of the New World, and it was their golden age, and quite literally a golden age. They're just so overloaded with gold, their economy crashed. But yeah, it laid claim to more land than any other European country, and then it would just be the matter of actually filling up the land with people. And so many people left Spain to the New World. Spain also became depopulated. That's a whole other issue. But okay, so I think yeah, there's some coins. There's ships sailing into the New World, and then all this land was claimed by Spain. So it's basically the New World, the Philippines, and a couple little islands all over. All right, and that's it for me. Peace out.